Hey, Les from Northwoods here. We're going to be talking about big leaf maple, and we're going to be talking about identifying things in the maple by looking at the bark based on conclusions I've made from my experience working with the wood for several years. As I go out and buy trees all the time, I need to know with reasonable certainty that there's figure there. The figures that I'm looking for particularly will be burl, fiddleback, curly, and quilted. Behind me here we have a really great example of a big leaf maple burl tree. It's probably, in my estimation, is probably 120 to 150 years old would be my guess. Again, of course, that's just a guess. And what we're looking at, the lower part of this stump, which is probably, I'm going to talk about the first 7 feet or so. As you can see, it's well burled, and we know that because of it's almost like popcorn coming out. The other thing that indicates that it's a burl is we have these little offshoots of branches that come out, little limbs that never actually form a limb. They come out and die within a matter of minutes, or could be an hour, could be a day, could be a week. Burl, of course, is classified as undirected growth. It doesn't really have a pattern to it. It doesn't have an end grain. It doesn't have a side grain. So it's just kind of a mix of different directions that the actual fibers go, which actually is really great when you turn wood, or turn especially burl, because you don't have to worry about grain direction necessarily. And for me, as a wood cutter, I don't have to worry about the direction that I cut it when I cut it on the mill. Right in this area here, and actually a little bit over there, we call those flutes. And in those flutes you'll see a lot of bark inclusions, which can go all the way into the center of the tree or can be very superficial. It's hard to know without cutting the tree down. So there's also a tremendous amount. If this was just a standing maple tree, we'd be looking at that and saying that there's probably some figure inside of that flute because of the stress that's put on the wood as the tree grows and as it's shifting with the soil and trying to stay upright. It creates some kind of probably a structural balancing thing. One of the things as I look at burl, I like to understand or identify those areas that I think are going to be of higher quality. Quality only makes a difference when you're working with instrument wood, say for guitars or violins or things like that. And also when you're making a bowl, and the tighter the pins in the burl, the easier it is to turn, I think, as well as the result is much better. So if you're looking at tighter pins, which is indicating higher quality, then you're going to look for the smaller blocks in the formation of the bark on the outside. And if we can pan down a little lower here, we can see where it starts to become bigger blocks. They're further apart, they're bigger chunks. That tends to be a little less as far as quality of burl. You're going to have more space in between the pins. You're going to have maybe polyps that come out a little bit more so than you would in the tighter blocked area. Not that it's not good burl, it's just only for a grading purpose, only for the type of bowl or the type of use you have for the burl. I'm asked many times where I find the burl in the tree, and this one's fairly obvious, where you can see it starts right at the bottom of the trunk, right next to the ground. It possibly could even be slightly under the ground as well. And as we go up the tree, you see that flute that I talked about earlier, and then the more quality of the burl right there in that one section. And then as we go up the tree, you'll see several places where burl is just prolific all the way up. Now burl can be really intense in one area, can be the size down to the size of a quarter and up as much as several tons. in one particular growth. The burl actually grows from the center of the tree out as a tree matures from a young tree to an older old growth tree in the form of a kind of in a cone shape or a diamond shape from the center out. Here again we have another big leaf maple tree. On this tree I'd like to show you what a typical bark pattern is for the big leaf maple, and probably most maples as well, and that is the bark generally runs vertically up the tree. Also, one thing to note on this tree too is we have a portion here that looks like it was damaged. If you look at it from this side, this is what first thing I would see, which means that either in a big windstorm or maybe another tree fell against it, or as an infant maybe it got a snow or ice break on it. But then on closer investigation, if you go to the other side of the tree, it's hollow on the inside, so which indicates that it probably would not be a very good saw log. However, it does have burls on it, so we're going to be looking at harvesting it for the burl purpose. Here again we have the growth coming out of the burl. You can see that it's come out, and this one might have lasted probably most of the summer, I would think, and it's just starting to die off. You can see here this one already has leaves that have died and part of the limb that's died. This will be dead before midwinter. So we've talked about burl. Now we're going to talk about some of the other figures that we find in wood, especially big leaf maple that we work with. What we're going to look at here is an example of what could be either curly or fiddleback. We're going to look at what compression looks like in the bark as it relates to where the limb comes out of the tree, as well as where you would find wood that's called tension wood. And that would be on this tree right in front of us. What you're going to see right in this area right here, we have 3 limbs that have come out. One here, here, and a little bit lower here. In between them, we find burl. You'll see the little block-like structure on the bark. But just a little bit above that, we're going to see some rippling in the bark going vertically, or excuse me, horizontally, which interrupts the pattern of the bark. Remember we talked about the bark going pretty much vertical up the trunk. This interrupted that and changed it. So there is some figure here. We don't know exactly what it is, but indications are, and from my experience, I would say that there is figure right in this area. Also, when we get up a little higher, you'll see some of the bark kind of makes a crossing pattern, maybe like an X or a V, and then underneath this limb, all that area in there would be called compression, or it's under compression from the weight of this limb that was there before, which also causes figure, kind of compresses the fiber, so to speak, and causes it to create figure. Here again on the side you're going to see the outer bark going in more of a straight line, but the under bark you'll see some crossing of it, so it almost makes an X. Again, another good indication of figure. Now above this limb you're going to see again some blocky areas here, and you're going to have those fibers that have stretched because of the weight of the limb that have created some figure up there. What it looks like at this point we don't know, but we're easily assured that there's some kind of figure underneath there. Also, a little bit higher up, what we see when we have 2 limbs coming together, it forms a crotch or a bond that bonds those 2 limbs or trunks together so they don't fall apart. Now a lot of times there'll be bark inclusions that will be in the midst of that. Upon occasion, which we really love to see, we'll see that there aren't any inclusions in there, and it gives you what we call crotch figure, kind of a pattern in there. It can be pretty spectacular when you're making a vase or a hollow form. So here we see a crossing pattern in the bark We see it will make more or less make an X. It'll have an over bark, which is the most exterior of the bark, and then there'll be a smaller part of the bark that runs just slightly under it or intersects with it. That's also a very good indication that there's figure here. This particular part of the tree is actually was under compression when there was a limb coming out in that area right there. But at this point there still is some figure in there. And my guess would be that it's probably something along the lines of a curly figure. If you find a tree that has that predominantly as its bark pattern, then you know that you've got something.